Good afternoon and welcome to the 25th Hour. I'm Dustin Cook.
And I'm Bobby Williams.
As Ottawa approaches its 150th anniversary, we're turning back the clocks and taking a look at some throwback stories still shaping our nation's capital today.
We'll be kicking it off old school for sure. Join us as we visit the hottest ticket in town and find out what's keeping Ottawa's roller derby scene spinning.
The new buzz in Barbershop a cappella, adding young voices to a very retro sound.
And just an hour south of Ottawa, Canada's oldest foundry continues to churn out everything from fence posts to signs and cannons.
But first, jazz is one of few genres that's managed to stand the test of time in an age of rap music and hip-hop beats. Michaela Peacock has more on how a younger generation is still getting jazzy with it.
For decades, musicians have used music to connect with their idols. For one Ottawa musician, Andrew Knox, he uses jazz as a way to connect with his past. We sat down with him to learn more about the ever-changing nature of jazz.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
So my name's Andrew Knox, I'm 24, and I'm a trumpet player in a jazz band. Well, I would say traditional jazz isn't, well, it's not completely gone, but it's not quite as thriving as what it used to be, but it's sort of manifested into a whole bunch of different styles. So there's a whole bunch of fusion type styles, like right now it's really popular to have jazz fused with hip hop and R&B. It's kind of getting into a little bit more top 40 now, like with elements of like Bruno Mars's new album that just came out is loads of jazz in it. Yeah, I would say that because it's going into the more contemporary popular stream, that it's keeping a lot of millennials in jazz music. Jazz is based around feeling, right? So when I think of like nostalgia, like a whole bunch of feelings of anything that I associate sort of comes with it. So jazz music's all about association and your own personal experience and what you bring to the table musically. So feeling nostalgic is just basically representative of the music that we're making and sort of elements of older style looking more in towards the future. I tend to think about older, more legendary musicians, like me personally, Louis Armstrong, who essentially wrote the beginning parts of jazz, but was also a very gifted trumpet player and vocalist. And as a musician or aspiring to be a good musician, you tend to think about what made those players great. So you try to emulate as much of that sound as you can while still kind of bringing some of your own sound in. The way my music sounds and the way that I'm feeling are definitely connected. Sometimes the sound of my music sounds agitated if I've had a stressful day. Other times it's smooth, relaxed, and carefree when I've actually had a good day. On other times, if I'm not playing something right, then that could also affect my mood. So it's definitely interconnected, and they're just both one, I guess. If you're playing an older swing tune, then it shouldn't sound the same as the next guy. And personally, I like to try to make it as different as I can, but I'm still learning jazz, so there's only so far that I'm physically able to go before it sounds completely different than the tune, then it kind of loses its effect, but that's my personal thing. But there's still a lot for me to learn, and I don't think I'll ever stop learning because sort of the idea of jazz is it's just constantly evolving, so.
Barbershop Therapy is one of the newest quartets in town, but their sound is as old as the inspiration behind their name. As Lindsay Bright finds out, the group is giving a fresh cut to a graying scene.
Barbershop music may have been around when haircuts were only a nickel, but a young quartet is lighting up Ottawa with its retro sound.
I'm sitting on top of the world, just rolling along, just rolling along, because I'm quitting the blues.
I competed in high school with a quartet who competed with another quartet from 2 of my members now, and they ended up beating me.
Canterbury High School, there was a male choir, and you know, those were all the cool kids, so naturally went to go sing with them.
And that's where we saw Richard, and we actually beat him 2 years in a row, which is pretty nice, because you know, he was okay, but we were better.
I remember when we started university, and I met back up with them, and I was like, oh my god, you guys were in that quartet that beat me. Like, please be in a quartet with me. And so, yeah, we kind of just started from there. We found somebody else who was a vocal major.
And they were like, hey, we're going to put together a barbershop quartet. And I was like, cool, I can do that.
It kind of just started. We all loved singing barbershop, and yeah. Just like Humpty Dumpty, I'm ready to fall because I'm sitting on top of the world, just singing a song, just singing a song. I'm sitting on top of the world. I think one of my favorite experiences was when we went to go perform at Blues Fest just this past summer. It's probably one of the biggest festivals here in Ottawa. They used to tell me I was building a dream, and so
there were a couple of times when you just like tuned in, like you just heard through the monitors what you were sounding like, and there was just some chords that were really ringing.
Really cool to be able to go to such a renowned festival that so many amazing artists that like I look up to and that I've listened to for years, and like share not only the stage but like the festival of it all, and just be there where so many other great musicians and artists have stood. You know? I was building a dream.
I did some busking in the Byron Market, which was sometimes, you know, off kilt, just singing without a hat, right? Because with the license, like you need a license, but if you don't have a license and you just sing, you don't pick up money, but people still come and listen to us, and we're just like, just don't pay us anything.
There's actually this one guy who came, put $5 in our bin before we even started singing. He said, all right, now work for your money. And so we sang him Oh Holy Night, and then he dumped $100 in the hat. He said, yeah, you know, I spent a bit of money on a Porsche this morning, so this eases my conscience.
Brother, can you spare a just one dime? No, 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 no. There's a time for everyone. There's this quote that I really like. It's from Eric Whitaker, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's basically that performers never actually get used to performing on stage. They simply just get really used to being terrified.
Honestly, it's one of the best feelings you can ever get. It's just it's so intense. Like you're up there, you're in the moment.
To feed off the energy in the crowd, you know, when the chord is really ringing, everybody's like, wow, what's this sound that I've never heard before?
I'm notorious for having this sort of like deer in the headlights expression when I'm on stage, or like just this deadpan face, like.
This wide-eyed wanderer that we've got this far.
So that'd be really amazing to kind of tour North America and just kind of show people what Barbershop Quartet is, right? Because there's so many, especially our generation, they have no idea what it is. And we go.
But they love it.
They absolutely love it. Like, especially our show, like, it was all kids, young adults, our generation, right?
The kids these days, it's the new fad that's sweeping.
Sorry. It's enough to make kings. I think by the time we're finished our bachelors and like we've been singing together for like a couple of years, we're gonna. Well, no, it's not gonna be hatred. I think we'll consider each other like brothers. Very.
we go from the stage and into the barber's chair. Traditional barbering has faded away with the rise of hair salons. Yet, as Michael Yang reports, the high and tight cut is back in vogue, and the lost art is making its comeback.
Thanks. Everyone knows how hard it is to find a good barbershop these days. That is just as true today as it was 50 years ago. We're here at Imperial Barbershop, where they're putting a modern twist on the traditional art of barbering. And I'm ready to take a little bit off the top.
I couldn't believe it though. I've never worked at a barbershop. First day I had like 10 customers. I was like, this is mental.
That's insane. Oh,
it was insane. It really was. I wanted to quit. I was never
What am
back.
I getting myself into?
Oh yeah, I was like, what? This is way too hard. I'm not doing it. Hi, I'm Jeff. I am a traditional barber at Imperial Barbershop, Slater Street, 275 Slater Street. The bangingest barbershop in the downtown area or any area. That's right. Is that too much?
No.
I've been here since 2.5 years. I came here to follow a dream with a real company, real barbers, real traditional barbering. I didn't want to do it in some hacky shop, so to say. Not that any specific shops are happy, but I just knew that this was an authentic shop, and it was my best chance to learn the trade and skills that I wanted to learn. I think like there's an authentic way to do a haircut, and it's in a barbershop. Like you can tell whose haircut's from a barbershop and whose isn't. It's just, there's art to it. There's crisp lines. It's a lot of like tight faded corners, edges, short cuts. People like extremely short haircuts. Tighter the better, the closer the better. It's more risk. People are going to the past for a lot of trends now, right? Haircuts were just crisper and cleaner, so I think times change, like trends change. People were growing their hair longer. It was just inevitable that like waves come and go, right? But they always get heated again, you know? Like it was inevitable, I feel like, until traditional barbering caught on again. It's still there, but you get in a barbershop, I find everybody kind of helps you. Like people go out of their way here to help you learn, and you know, if they're a great barber, they want to make you a great barber. We all reflect upon one another. So when you come in and you come sit in my chair once, you're like an old friend. That's the vision of barbering that I love. Is like you're not just because you're a barber, you're not part of the family. You're a client, you're part of the family. You support us, you're part of the family. And people feel that when they come in here. Like when they come in here once a month, twice a month, or twice every 3 months. Some barbershops are cutthroat, but this one is a family through and through, and that's why I love it here. It's not just about cutting hair.
Liar.
Huh? Really?
You never go without the bun.
I am. 2017.
2017? No
Really?
Are you serious? My after drink or my after dinner cocktail bun. Crown. Like I want to be the best barber I can be. I want to be the best coworker I can be. The best, you know, creative influence upon my coworkers, and you know, bust ass and be the best, essentially. I think it's a gentleman's club. I think it's a place that fathers are proud to bring their sons. And excuse me, on Christmas Eve, people come in here with their sons, 2 sons and their daughter, or just experiencing it with their family. It's like, oh, you know, this is a place where I go. Like, come see where I get my haircut. You know, experience this other family I might have. And when you come in and you come sit in my chair once, you're like an old friend. I think I was destined to be a barber because I like to treat people well. I like to feed off energy from others. I like to give and receive energy. I make sure that like if you have 5 minutes with me, I'll give you exactly like all that I can. Like you'll be affected one way or another because I will also be affected by you. I'm not ashamed to say it. Imperial, the skills every barber in this company has is second to none. Nobody cuts hair like an Imperial barber, and I'm lucky.
Roller derby is not just another blast from the past. In fact, it's alive and booming in the nation's capital with leagues for men, women, and children. Brianne Smith is on scene at the rink. Let's check in with her.
I'm here today at Jean-Marc Lalonde Arena. Though ice no longer floods its surface, this rink is not forgotten, much like the sport of roller derby in Ottawa. I'll take a look inside to see how one team utilizes this space.
when I feel it, it just feels amazing. Like everybody experiences their first game, and that's when they just feel, there's something called a derby high, where after your game, people just feel like everything's awesome, and I've felt that pretty much in every game. And I think that's what brings people back to the sport, like despite injury, despite it being a huge commitment, like freezing cold arenas all year. There's just something to be said for doing something so physically demanding with a team. You just feel so, you never thought you could do it, but you can do it. So it brings a lot of people back. So it's really fun. It's really powerful.
Roller derby traces its origins to the multi-thousand-mile skating races of the 1930s. Today there are 3 derby leagues in Ottawa, built on the traditions of the sport's past. Katrin Dahl thinks it's roller derby's past practices that are important in supporting the sport's success.
The important part about maintaining sort of the history and the culture of roller derby is that it can be legitimate in itself, even though it's kind of like this weird thing, and that we don't have to make it like sort of streamline or make it like every other sport in order for it to be considered a legitimate sport.
At the heart of Ottawa's roller derby community is Dolly Rogers captain Mel Taylor. Her derby shop, Neon Skates, helps fuel the sports culture in town.
It wasn't long before I realized, like, this is actually pretty cool. I want to do this. I want to go all in. And so I quit my job and I started running the store, and it's been an amazing decision.
While serving the sports community, Taylor has noticed that classic skating is making a comeback.
All of this kind of retro stuff is becoming mainstream again. So I think it's a culture and a sport and a community that I'm really happy is growing and accepting more and more people into it, because I think it's awesome. I love the community. I love getting to meet all of the different players and leagues all across Eastern Canada. I take the van out to Moncton twice a year, and I get to meet all of the East Coast players. So it's just exposed me to a community that I love, and a job that's still, like, it's still stressful wanting to provide good quality products, but it's what I love, and I love spending hours and hours in the workshop just building skates, and so it's a really good fit for me.
Those immersed in the sport are familiar with regular change. In the modern era, the focus has shifted from fashion and flair to performance and athleticism. Derby athletes expect this to continue.
The side of derby that used to be a little bit more like costume-based and persona-based has really kind of shifted towards, this is a sport and we're athletes and we want to be taken seriously. So I think there's going to be a continuation in that direction.
I come from a sports background, so I never was interested in being labeled like a roller derby girl. I just want to play a sport that I really like.
But I truly hope that, in fact, there's an element of the grassroots sort of building of the sport so that the sport continues to be sustainable, because we can't all be the best athletes in the world. And actually part of the appeal is that you don't have to be. You can also work towards being the best at the sport that you want to be and having a place for you to play.
For roller derby in Ottawa, the future looks wide open.
So why exactly are we drawn to the past? The 25th Hour's Amanda Prusila sat down with Benjamin Wu, a comic book and pulp culture specialist, to get the nitty-gritty on nostalgia.
What do you think draws people to comic books?
What draws people to any other kind of entertainment medium, right? There's a kind of storytelling feature that they want to access, right? So particularly as comic books and graphic novels start to tell a wider range of stories again, they break outside of that ghetto of the superhero genre. Historically, again, we had that sort of focus on a collector subculture where recapturing a certain feeling from childhood was often a part of the attraction, right? So people were exposed to comics in their youth and they stayed collectors, and they were trying to complete their runs of particular titles. They were looking to collect all of the work of a particular artist or writer. They had a particular emotional attachment to a certain character, and they wanted to collect everything that that character appeared in, for example. So there were lots of different motivations captured up in the collecting impulse. But now we see, I think, a greater proportion of the comic book audience are oriented to reading comics and accessing them as primarily as entertainment media rather than as collector's items now.
Why do people form an attachment to the past using comic books?
I think that part of it is that association with childhood, that comics, particularly for a certain segment of the audience, comics were a medium that, as children, as teenagers, sort of both separated them from some of their peers, but also bonded them tightly with other groups of friends, and so that attachment with childhood is often a large piece of many of our media consumption patterns. So I think there's something very similar happening there with comics. So for those members of the audience who bonded with their friends, who escaped from certain other kinds of pressures, perhaps through comics when they were children and teenagers, the ability to recapture something of that feeling by buying a material object and storing it in your home and pulling it out every once in a while, flipping through the pages, feeling the material of the paper stock, that there's a very kind of affective, tactile quality to reading comics.
Would you say that the comic book industry is more nostalgic than other forms of entertainment, or would you say they're fairly on par?
I would say that historically it has been more nostalgic, but we're at a moment right now in a lot of media industries that are very heavily driven by nostalgia. So, the extent to which you go to the movie theater these days, and 80% of what you see will be remakes of existing franchises, right? So again, trying to use nostalgia and the way that we recognize existing brands and franchises as a way to try to manage demand for media properties, right? To say, we know we can rely on there being a certain audience for a Star Wars movie or a Ghostbusters movie.
Okay, so kind of drawing off of the Ghostbusters example, does nostalgia ever backfire on companies?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Ghostbusters example is obviously a great one, right? That attempt to present something that's familiar but different, which I think is the sweet spot that all of these companies want to hit, right? Something that will bring you out but will not seem boring and tired and repetitive. So the appeal to properties with tried and true existing fandoms is that you can guarantee that those people will come out to your movie no matter what, right? Whenever they release a Star Trek movie or a Star Wars movie or a Marvel movie, there's a certain number of people who will come no matter how bad the reviews are, no matter what, right? Because they are fans of those characters, they're fans of those properties.
You often hear a lot of negative feedback from fans of original series that they don't like the reboots or the sequels. So why do you think they keep coming back to watch these movies despite seemingly hating them?
Sometimes people like to be outraged. They like to go and criticize it. I think at some level, I think that at some level, they're still entranced by the franchise, by the property, by the characters and the universe that it created. But I think we don't know a lot yet about that.
Churches have long dotted our nation's capital, but the historical places of worship may be rapidly changing. Lewis Gordon is at Dominion Chalmers United Church in downtown Ottawa with the story.
Thank you, guys. There's been a recent trend in the Ottawa area of churches being boarded up and sold to local residents and businesses. We took a look at what happened in these former churches and also what the future may hold for current churches like this one. Check this out.
I grew up in the church, was exposed to it and really liked how the church worked as a community. I thought in my teen years about going into the ministry, but then realized I didn't know enough about the world, and so I actually got some advice to try everything else but the church, and then if you're ready, come back. Over the years struggled with, what do I want to do with my life, and helping people, and things like philosophy always interested me. So the church was a great place to bring philosophy and ideas and helping people and making the world a better place come together. The congregation is almost 200 years old. This particular building is the 8th building they've used in their history. We were the first Methodist church in Ottawa. Sir John A. Macdonald, first Prime Minister of Canada, was a member of Dominion Methodist, and there have been a number of cabinet ministers and important politicians be a part of the congregation. A lot of the people who built Ottawa, quite literally, were part of this congregation. Churches have been in decline for about 50 years. The church used to be the center of the social life of the community. I just did a funeral for a man who was in his 90s. He met his wife here in church. And that's why he came to church, was because he knew that this was a good church and there were lots of young, smart, pretty women, and it was a good, safe place to meet. And as the social roles have changed, there's less of a role for the church to play in the larger society.
My name is Melissa Reeves. I'm Director of Sales and Marketing for Mudbox Developments. We have some big plans for this building. So it's the former St. Charles Church. It was deconsecrated in 2013. We purchased it in 2014, and our plans are to turn the inside of this church into a marketplace and restaurant, and along the outside to build 58 condo units.
I'm not religious, I'm not Anglican, but churches have served a lot of uses beyond just the worship space. So when the building was put on the market, we formed something called a Save the Saints Community Working Group to look at the kinds of uses that people wanted to see in this space.
It was for sale. I mean, a building like this doesn't come for sale that often. It's fairly unique. When I saw this, I mean, it was definitely an impulse buy because I knew that I was going to sink a shit ton of money into it and not necessarily get it back. And I mean, you are part of something, right? Like, this building is always going to be known within the community. You might have, like, a couple of houses down the road that within 50 years they're going to get demolished and torn down and something else will be built. Nobody's tearing this down anytime soon. I realized the history of it. I mean, a lot of people had a lot of pain and a lot of joy in here. I mean, there were obviously weddings and then funeral services. So that's something that you have to understand, and
Well, we knew that St. Charles Church had an important place in the community because it had always been, for over 100 years, a gathering place, an important gathering place for all of these communities. And we just wanted to continue that, and just with new life and in a new way.
If you just took this building and it was, I mean, all it is the stones and the windows and the walls. I mean, you have a beautiful building, but you don't really have the spirit that's in it. And that doesn't have to be a religious spirit, it can be a community spirit.
Our church building seats 900 people. It's very expensive to keep up. We have about 200 members, about 90 people on a Sunday, but that's not enough to pay all the bills. And so we're having to look at what our options are, because you can't sort of run deficits forever. Like I said, this is building number 8. What's number 9? Who knows? Or is there a way to partner with somebody that who could take over the building, use it for other purposes, and give us, a corner to sort of continue on in?
Textiles are woven into the fabric of Canada's history. 40 minutes from the nation's capital in the town of Almonte, textiles have been a part of daily life for more than 150 years, and the local museum is working hard to preserve that heritage. Justin Szymanski-Langell reports.
We're standing outside of the former Rosamond Textile Mill here in Almont, Ontario, which since it closed down in the 1980s has been working as the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum, serving to protect Canada's rich textile manufacturing heritage.
All those industrial machines were sitting upstairs, but they had no interpretation. They weren't in any particular order.
We're going to go talk to Michael Rickley Lancaster about how he helped transform this defunct mill into a modern museum.
We're a National Historic Site. We interpret the woolen industry of Canada. Nowadays, museums have to become more relevant to current day and relate through the history to current day situations. And I think the more engaging and the more hands-on you can do, and not just put objects away and lock them up and never handle them, never look at them, never study them. I think that's the only way to learn and really understand and grow as a person and as people. So we try to interpret that through our programming. Some of it's direct interpretation, like our Fabric for Small Town exhibition. We opened that in 2010, which is the step-by-step of how industrial woolen processing is done. And what was exciting about that is when I started here, all those industrial machines were sitting upstairs, but they had no interpretation. They weren't in any particular order. What started it was the natural water power. The amount of natural waterfalls we had in the community. It's such a beautiful, picturesque town still to this day with all the beautiful waterfalls, but that is really the main reason they came to this community. Their goals and plans were to make a very distinct product for pants and suits. And it's really exciting to think of back in that time period how large scale this company was. And we're starting to learn more and more every day because we wanted to see something again step by step of how the processing is done, but show it in an interesting way. So we did the step by step and have one machine representing each aspect. But then we also did some multimedia components within that, which I found very exciting, doing the video recording, showing machines actually operating, and then also doing some sound components so you could hear what the machine sounded like. Some of the ones that stand out most to me is like the carding machine. So you can see really nice details that I like seeing throughout it. And you would have had maybe a whole floor in the factory devoted just to the carding machines. Then you have the large looms as well. And there's some interesting, quirky notes on the like graffiti on the loom that tell stories of its own. Whether it be there's a piece of wood here that says rat basher on it. I can only imagine that wasn't just for rats. I don't want to think too deeply of it. I don't want to imagine too much, but again, it has stories, it has ghosts, I'm sure, with it. We have in our collection examples of material that was made in this mill. So the idea is that we would actually recreate some of the fabrics and we would sell the fabric as a final product that people could purchase. For me, it's not really about revenue generating. It's more about that interpretation, that hands-on interpretation. We've always had a really good weave program here where master weavers volunteer their time. They come in and weave and interpret weaving to audiences that come through the museum. We have about 4 looms operating upstairs. We have a handful of volunteers working away at those looms. But one of the looms we most recently acquired was a 100-inch loom. I find that loom very exciting because it's 2 people sitting at a loom weaving simultaneously and really have to get into a rhythm. And it has become quite a popular program, and there are a lot of potential of growth for that program and reaching out and getting involved in more community groups coming in to try that project out. And it's, to me, a fun way of someone learning something historic, and they don't even feel like they're learning, they're just having a fun time while doing it. We try to set things up so that when we have a contemporary textile artist come and showcase their textile artwork, that we have programs along with those exhibitions where the artist comes in and teaches a workshop. There's a really wide range, again, like the workshop we had today, which is the Penny Rug workshop from Danielle Potvin. Very exciting to see people being engaged with old practices that are becoming new practices.
Penny rugs originate from the States. They were made, they started making them at about 1860, and they were made out of scrap wool pieces. The traditional penny rugs were made out of circles more, like a big circle, smaller, 3-layer stick, and also tongues around the piece. So that's more like traditional, a tongue or something like a triangle around it. Contemporary, it tells you more like a story. You can have, fishes and houses and trees, and you can have the legend, for example, the flying canoe,
People knew what color was being dyed that day because of what color was in the natural water system. Red dye especially has carcinogenic or cancer-causing components in it. If we don't look at what was done in history and take it with that respect and how we can use that information or that old technology to understand how we can prevent illnesses now, but also to give us an understanding that we're always growing, we're always learning, and we're always gaining knowledge in order to improve. The way to bring people into your museum is being current, contemporary, and edgy, if you will. But it's also looking forward and doing, like I said, using these industrial artifacts to actually get them operating again to produce material. So not looking at an artifact necessarily as an object to just be put away in a box and shelved, and looking at how can we use those to educate and interpret.
Another small town just outside Ottawa is also intent on keeping its historic tradition. Amanda Prusila visits the Alloy Foundry in Merrickville and learns how this unique institution has survived to this day.
What does Rideau Hall's fence and Little Italy signs have in common?
They were all made in Canada's oldest operating foundry. Located along the Rideau Canal in Merrickville, Ontario,
Alloy Foundry has been making metal castings since before Confederation.
Linda Fage was fascinated by the cast metal signs she saw in England, which inspired her to make similar signs at her foundry.
And they're made the same way, and a lot of people will have seen them. So little plaques with flowers on them and a date or a time or a number of your house or that kind of thing. So people kind of recognize them when they come in and they say, oh, this is where they're made.
She and her husband bought the foundry over 20 years ago and continue to preserve the legacy to this day.
The foundry was definitely important for the development of Merrickville because they cast a lot of the pieces that allowed other businesses to run. They employed at their height about 65 people, so it was quite a large business. They supplied agricultural implements for all over Ontario, really.
The foundry still makes industrial parts, but the artistry of the craft is now at the forefront of what they do.
Well, one of the things that we do is we make directional arrows, and they're seen all over the place. Particularly, a lot of people have noticed the Little Italy ones because they're white, and there are many of them.
There are lots of steps involved in making these one-of-a-kind pieces.
So what I'm doing here is I'm making some what we call emblems for the signs. There are many, many different flowers and birds and trees and dogs and horses and tractors even, and people have all kinds of things that they really want to have on their sign. Our most popular are the leaves, and we have them in all different sizes and we paint them up and they look beautiful.
Once Linda prepares the template, Devin Scott uses it to make a sand casting.
Being able to take something that is shaped like one thing and then transforming it into something that's artistic and beautiful, I think is definitely rewarding.
Just like with sand castles, moist sand is needed to form that perfect shape.
In this part of the foundry, metal is melted and then poured into molds to make new shapes. Come check it out.
Most foundries work with one type of metal, but this foundry works with 3: iron, bronze, and aluminum. Aluminum is poured at temperatures of between 1250 and 1450 degrees Fahrenheit. Iron and bronze are poured at even higher temperatures.
There are certain things too that you can only make with an old-fashioned foundry like this. The big ones are not set up to do work, one-of-a-kind work or 5-of-a-kind. You know, they're set up to do thousands of widgets, that kind of thing. So I think there will always be artists who would like to experiment with it. Every plaque is a work of art.
I think it's amazing how the foundry's adapted to economic change really, really well. And the stuff that they're doing now, the artistic stuff, and it's just incredible.
This takes 110 hours of painting. There's so much shading, and it's really quite beautifully done. It's all done right here in the foundry. We tell people our signs will last forever, and I really mean that. When people, their eyes kind of, go wide at the idea that, what, you can actually make something that lasts forever? Yes, I tell people we've been doing for over 20 years, and every day is different, and you have an opportunity to do a whole bunch of different things. It's never boring here. Ever. Sometimes we kind of wish it would be a little bit. We could slow down, sometimes it's wild. But foundries, I think, will always be around. There'll always be a need. There will always be people wanting to get things done this way.
Roller derbies, barbershop quartets, all of this is making me feel really young again.
Or really old.
Well, that does it for our show this week. I'm Bobby Williams.
And I'm Dustin Cook. On behalf of the 25th Hour crew, thanks for tuning in.